The sky over Neo-Kiv is a permanent, sickly orange. Kalin, a scavenger who knows the secrets of the old world, watches a silent dropship descend into the central plaza for the first time in a generation. He whispers to his companion that the architects have returned, and nothing will ever be the same again. By the end of this journey, you will witness the fall of a dystopian empire and the fragile birth of a new hope for humanity. What was the terrible truth hidden behind the Great Culling, and could a single relic from the past really shatter an unbreakable order? What would you be willing to sacrifice to reclaim a future that was stolen from you? The air in the old library was thick with the scent of rust and forgotten paper. Kalin's fingers, coated in grime, brushed against a seam in the collapsed shelving unit, revealing a hidden compartment. There, nestled in a cradle of frayed wires, was the data core. It was smaller than he expected, its ceramic shell cool to the touch, but from its heart came a soft, rhythmic pulse of blue light. It was a ghost, a sliver of the old world still breathing. Lyra's hand clamped on his arm, her voice a sharp whisper cutting through the silence. "That is architect technology, Kalin. The moment you touch it, they will know we are here." Her eyes were wide with a fear he had not seen in seasons, but he was not looking at her. He was looking at the light. It was a question he had spent his entire life trying to answer. His fingers closed around the smooth object. The moment he lifted it, the gentle pulse of light shifted, flickering once, twice, and then holding a steady, ominous red. No klaxons sounded, no shouts echoed in the ruins. The alarm was silent, a whisper sent directly to those who listened for such things. "Run," Lyra hissed, already pulling him backward. They scrambled over fallen beams and through shattered doorways, the weight of the core a cold stone in Kalin's pocket. From the street outside, they heard the distinct, heavy footfalls of Enforcer patrol boots, their synchronized rhythm a stark contrast to the chaotic ruin. There was no time for the main passages. They plunged deeper into the skeletal remains of the university, into the sublevels where the darkness was absolute, and the air grew cold and still. What had he just awakened, and what answers, buried for a generation, did this flickering relic truly hold? The darkness in the sublevel was a physical weight, pressing in from all sides. Kalin's shoulders scraped against rough concrete as he and Lyra pressed themselves into a shallow alcove, the rhythmic thud of Enforcer boots echoing just around the corner. There was nowhere left to run. The red pulse from the data core in his pocket seemed to beat in time with his own frantic heart, a beacon announcing their location. Then a hand clamped over his mouth from behind. "Do not make a sound," a low voice growled in his ear. Before Kalin could struggle, a section of the wall beside them, which he would have sworn was solid rock, slid open with a whisper of displaced dust. The masked figure shoved them both through the opening, and the wall sealed shut behind them, plunging them into a new, slightly warmer darkness. "Follow me and do not stray," the figure commanded, his voice echoing in a narrow, man-made tunnel. The air smelled of damp earth and ozone. They moved in a single file line, their guide a silent silhouette ahead. After what felt like an eternity of twists and turns, a soft, artificial glow appeared in the distance, growing until they stepped out into a vast, cavernous space. Kalin blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust. They were in an immense underground chamber, a repurposed transit hub from the old world. Makeshift dwellings were carved into the sides of old subway tunnels, and strings of salvaged lights cast a warm, hazy glow over a bustling community of hundreds. This was the Warrens. Their guide finally stopped and turned to face them. With a slow, deliberate motion, he removed his mask. His face was weathered and lined, but it was the scarring that drew the eye. Lichtenberg figures, like the branches of a frozen lightning bolt, traced a path from his temple down his neck, the skin shiny and pale. He saw Kalin staring. "An energy whip," he stated flatly, his voice now clear and resonant. A disciplinary tool from my time in the Archon quarries. He gestured around them at the thriving, hidden city. The architects preach an order of peace and unity, a necessary structure for our survival. It is the most brilliant lie ever told. Their order is not for our protection. It is a system built for one purpose, our complete subjugation. He locked eyes with Kalin, his gaze intense. My name is Jax, and that data core you risked everything for, he said, pointing to the still glowing pocket, is not just a relic. It is a key. It might be the very key we need to tear their entire lie down. A soft, chime-like tone echoed through the cavern, and every head in the Warrens turned upward. Jax gestured to a wall where a complex array of scavenged projectors hummed to life. The rough stone surface dissolved into a flawless, city-wide holographic broadcast. The Chancellor's face materialized, her features serene and ageless, her expression one of gentle, absolute authority. Her voice was calm water over steel. Citizens of the unified bastions, she began, her words resonating through the underground chamber as if she were standing among them. Our society is a garden, carefully tended. Compliance ensures its continued growth, its survival. Deviation is a blight, and blights must be cleansed for the health of the whole. Remember the lesson of the Great Culling. It was a necessary purification, a fire that burned away the chaos of the old world so that our new, ordered society could rise from the ashes. Embrace the peace we provide. It is the only peace possible. As the projection faded, leaving the scent of ozone in the air, Kalin's hand was a tight fist at his side. He stared at the empty space where the Chancellor's face had been. His voice a low, raw whisper meant only for Lyra and Jax. That peace, he muttered, cost 8 billion lives. Jax placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, the pressure both a comfort and a restraint. He understands, Jax said, his own scarred face a mask of grim history. He is not just repeating a number, he feels the weight of it. That is why they are so afraid of relics like that data core. It does not just hold information. It holds memory. It remembers the world before their fire and the truth of how that fire was truly sparked. The core in Kalin's pocket felt heavier than ever, a cold, hard truth against his leg. What specific memory was it guarding, and what would happen when that memory finally woke up? The shielded room was a cocoon of humming machinery and flickering screens, a stark contrast to the rough-hewn rock of the surrounding warrens. Finn, a young man with eyes that seemed to permanently scan lines of code, connected a series of frayed filaments to the data core. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the core flared to life, its red pulse shifting back to a brilliant, steady blue. A complex three-dimensional star map bloomed in the center of the room, so crisp and detailed that Kalin could almost feel the void between the pinpricks of light. Finn leaned in, his fingers dancing across a makeshift control panel, tracing a single, brilliant line that shot out from their own solar system, past the familiar orbits of the gas giants, and into the deep, dark expanse beyond. His breath caught in his throat. "This is not just data," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "It is a navigation log, a flight path." He zoomed in on the terminus of the line, a point of empty space so distant it defied comprehension. It points to a location beyond the Kuiper belt, a place the log identifies as the Cradle. A stunned silence crashed over the room. The Cradle. The word itself felt ancient, a whisper from a time before the Great Culling, a term laden with a meaning so profound it was almost sacred. It was not a military outpost or a secret archive. It was a name that spoke of origins, of a beginning. Jax was the first to break the silence, his voice a low rumble that betrayed his own shock. "A generation ago, the architects came from the stars and offered us salvation from our own self-inflicted chaos. They said their home was lost, that they were the last of their kind. But this," he said, gesturing to the star map, This suggests they left something behind, or someone. Lyra stared at the shimmering point of light, her practical mind grappling with the scale of the revelation. A journey that far would take years, even with the old world's fastest ships. Why leave a record of it here, buried in a library on Earth, unless it was never meant for them? Unless it was meant for us. The data core was no longer just a key to the past. It had become a compass pointing to a future no one could have predicted. What kind of truth awaited at the end of that star trail? And what would it mean for a humanity living under the shadow of a galactic lie? The silence in the command hub was brittle, shattered by a frantic scout shoving a sealed packet into Jack's hands. It had been found at Kalin's old bolt hole, delivered by an unmarked enforcer courier. The material was cool, synthetic parchment, and it bore a single, stark symbol pressed into black wax. Jack broke the seal, his weathered hands unnervingly steady as he unfolded the message. He read it once, his expression unreadable, then passed it to Kalin without a word. The words were elegantly scripted, a personal note from a figure who existed only as a face on a screen. "You possess something that belongs to me." The Chancellor's voice seemed to whisper from the page. "Surrender the core, and you will be granted a place in the new hierarchy. Refuse, and the Warrens will be cleansed." The final word hung in the air, sucking all the warmth from the room. Cleansed, it was the same term she used in her broadcast, a gentle, clinical word for absolute annihilation. Lyra snatched the message, her eyes scanning the lines. "They know exactly where we are," she breathed, her voice tight. "This is not a negotiation, it is a countdown." Finn stared at the star map still glowing on the main projector, the path to the cradle a taunting ribbon of light. "We cannot fight them head-on. Their security grids are too dense, their weapons too advanced. A direct assault would be a death sentence for everyone here." But Jax was not looking at the map or the message. He was looking at Kalin, whose knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the console. "They are afraid," Jax said, his voice low and certain. "They are not offering you a place at their table because you are a nuisance. They are offering it because you are a threat. That core does not just belong to her. It holds a truth that can unravel her. This is not an ultimatum, it is an admission of weakness." The debate that followed was a quiet, desperate storm. Some argued for fleeing, for dispersing the community into the deeper ruins. Others saw that as a slower, more drawn-out version of the same fate. Surrender was never an option, not with the memory of the quarries etched into Jack's skin and the ghost of 8 billion lives weighing on them all. The core pulsed on the table between them, a silent arbiter. "We do not meet their force with force," Kalin finally said, his voice cutting through the arguments. "We meet their lie with the truth they are so desperate to contain. We follow the path. The journey to the cradle is our only move. It is a risk that defies all reason, a leap into the dark based on a single date, a point from a dead world." But what other choice do they have when the alternative is to wait for a cleansing fire to fall from the sky? The core had given them a direction. Now, the Chancellor's threat had given them a deadline. The debate that followed was not a council of war, but a quiet, desperate search for a single, viable path through the dark. Jack stood before a crude map of Neo-Kiv, his fingers stabbing at the central communications spire that pierced the skyline. A direct strike there, he argued, his voice a low rumble, would blind them. It would sever their command and control, create chaos in the streets, and give us the window we need. It is a clean, hard blow they will feel. But Lyra was already shaking her head, her gaze fixed on the softly pulsing data core. A direct assault is exactly what their enforcers are trained for. It is a fight they have already won in their simulations. She stepped forward, her voice steady but intense. The core emits a unique energy signature, a carrier wave that their own systems use for synchronization. "We do not attack their soldiers. We attack the air they breathe. If we can route this signal through the old maintenance conduits and into their primary power grid, we can induce a cascade failure. It would not just be a blackout. It would be a city-wide systems seizure, a moment of absolute silence. That is our only chance to get to the old starport and get off-world. The room fell silent, weighing the two futures. One was a loud, defiant bang that would almost certainly end in their capture or worse. The other was a silent, surgical strike that risked everything on a theory, on overloading the very heart of the architect's control with a relic they themselves had created. The core on the table seemed to pulse in agreement, a silent partner in the gamble. Finn was the first to speak, his technical mind already dissecting the possibility. The conduits are still there, but the insulation is degraded. The feedback surge would be immense. It would be like trying to channel a lightning bolt through a frayed wire. We would have one attempt. One. Jax looked from Lyra's determined face to the core, then back to the map. He slowly nodded, the scars on his face standing out in the dim light. A loud fight is a fight we will lose. A silent one, he conceded, gives us a ghost of a chance. The plan was set into motion, a clockwork of whispered assignments and stolen components. They were not soldiers preparing for a battle. They were surgeons preparing for a single, precise cut, one that would either stop a heart or restart their own. Could a sliver of ancient light truly disrupt a global empire of order? Or would it simply be absorbed by the overwhelming dark? The manufactured meteor shower began as a faint, distant glitter against the orange haze of the sky, a beautiful deception masking their approach. Kalin and Lyra moved like shadows through the skeletal remains of an old transit tunnel, the air humming with the immense energy of the power nexus just ahead. Its access hatch was a circular, heavily reinforced door, cold to the touch. Inside, the chamber was a cathedral of forgotten technology, a labyrinth of conduits and throbbing energy converters that fed the entire city. Lyra's hands moved with a practiced urgency, connecting the data core to a primary relay junction with salvaged filaments. The core's blue light intensified, pulsing in a frantic, syncopated rhythm as it began feeding its unique signal back into the system it was designed to command. She did not look up as she spoke, her voice barely a whisper yet carrying the weight of their entire future. This will give us 12 minutes of darkness. 12 minutes to get to the old spaceport. The moment the final connection was made, the light from the core flared into a blinding white star, and then everything stopped. It was not like a sunset or a lamp being switched off. It was an absolute, voracious absence. The omnipresent hum of the city ceased so completely that the silence felt like a physical blow. Every artificial light in Neo-Kiev, from the towering spires to the dimmest Enforcer patrol glow, winked out of existence in a single, simultaneous breath. The world was plunged into a profound and unnatural quiet, broken only by the first, distant sounds of confusion, a shout, the clatter of something falling. The rising murmur of a population suddenly cut adrift from the system that guided their every moment. For the first time in a generation, the city was blind, and in that blindness, a sliver of opportunity was born. The darkness was a living thing, a blanket of pure chaos they could wear as a cloak. Kalin led the way, his senses heightened, every nerve alive to the shouts and stumbling footfalls of disoriented Enforcer patrols. They moved not as fighters, but as phantoms, weaving through alleys where the sudden absence of light had created a temporary, beautiful anarchy. The path to the old spaceport was a gauntlet of shadows and confusion, each step taking them further from the choking order of the city, and closer to the silent, skeletal remains of humanity's former reach. The derelict spaceport was a graveyard of ambition, a vast plain of rusted gantries and the hollowed-out shells of ships that would never fly again. In the center of this metallic necropolis sat a single, hulking shape, a pre-fall heavy cargo hauler. Its name, Star Runner, was barely legible beneath layers of grime and corrosion. Jax was already at its base, prying open a maintenance hatch. His voice cut through the eerie silence, sharp and clear. "Finn, get the engines hot. We have minutes, not hours. Kalin, we need that core to plot the course." The data core felt warm in Kalin's hand as he scrambled up the loading ramp into the ship's dusty belly. The interior was a time capsule, smelling of stale air and old metal. He found the primary navigation console, brushing dust from its dead screen. As he connected the core, a spark of energy traveled up his arm, and the console flickered, ancient glyphs and star charts stuttering to life. Below, Finn was a whirlwind of activity, rerouting power and bypassing decayed systems. With a cough of black smoke and a shudder that ran through the entire ship, the engines sputtered to life. The vibration was a weak, thrumming pulse, a far cry from the powerful hum he had always imagined, but it was a heartbeat. It was hope. That hope crystallized into dread as Lyra, watching from the viewport, let out a sharp gasp. On the horizon, silhouetted against the first hints of the returning city lights, 3 distinct shapes resolved into enforcer gunships. They were moving fast, their sleek, predatory forms cutting through the sky directly toward them. The race was not over. It had just left the ground. The Star Runner was a lumbering beast pursued by wolves. The sleek architect interceptors closed in with impossible grace, their weapons glowing with a soft, lethal light. Inside the cockpit, alarms shrieked a constant, panicked chorus. Finn's hands were a blur across the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. "Their targeting systems are too advanced," he shouted over the din, his voice strained. "We cannot outrun them. This ship was built for hauling cargo, not for dodging plasma fire." Asteroids, some as large as mountains, tumbled past the viewport in a dizzying, chaotic dance. They were deep in the belt now, using the rocky debris as a shield, but every near miss shuddered through the old hull, a reminder of how thin their margin for error had become. Kalin was braced against a console, his eyes locked on the data streaming from the core. The ancient star map was overlaid with real-time sensor data, and a specific, fluctuating reading caught his eye: a distortion in the local gravity well, a place where sensors would scramble and targeting locks would fail. "There is a gravimetric anomaly ahead," he yelled back, pointing to a seemingly empty patch of space between 2 colossal asteroids. "A blind spot. Head for it now." Finn did not hesitate. He wrenched the control yoke, sending the Star Runner into a gut-wrenching dive straight toward the void Kalin had indicated. The pursuing ships adjusted their trajectory, confident in their kill. But as they crossed an invisible threshold, their formation suddenly broke. One interceptor veered wildly, its systems confused by the unnatural gravity, clipping a spinning rock in a silent, blossoming flash of light and debris. The other 2 slowed, their advanced sensors rendered useless by the churning space. For a precious moment, they were invisible, hidden not by stealth, but by a natural phenomenon the core had remembered. The silence in the cockpit was heavier than the alarm bells had been. They had escaped the immediate threat, but the anomaly was already fading behind them, and the remaining interceptors would not be fooled for long. The data core had given them a momentary reprieve, a secret pathway known only to a world long gone. How many more of these forgotten secrets were etched into its memory, and would they be enough to guide them all the way to the cradle? The Star Runner bucked like a wild animal, hurling them all against their restraints. The ship groaned in protest, its aging frame stressed to the limit as they plunged deeper into the swirling vortex of energy. Every console screen flickered, dying and resurrecting in a frantic dance of static and corrupted data. Alarms that had screamed for minutes were suddenly cut off, replaced by an absolute, unnerving silence. The violent shuddering ceased, replaced by a smooth, gentle drift. Kalin's ears popped with the sudden change in pressure. Lyra, her knuckles white where she gripped her chair, stared at the now clear viewport, her voice a hushed breath of disbelief. "Where are we?" Outside, the chaotic asteroid field was gone. In its place hung a planet of impossible beauty. A vibrant jewel of blues and greens swirled with white clouds. Orbiting it was a gleaming ring of silver, a testament to a technology that dwarfed anything they had ever known. Below, they could see the graceful arcs of cities nestled along coastlines, their structures harmonious with the landscape, sparkling under the gentle light of a stable, nurturing sun. There were no defensive platforms, no signs of industry or conflict, only a profound and majestic peace. This was not a military outpost or a hidden fortress. This was a sanctuary. The data core on the navigation console pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, as if it had finally, after a long and difficult journey, come home. Had they discovered the true home of the architects, a paradise they had abandoned, or had they stumbled upon something far older and far more significant? The polished white stone of the landing pad felt impossibly smooth beneath Kalin's worn boots, a stark contrast to the rust and rubble of his entire world. Before them stood a figure, tall and serene, draped in simple, earth-toned robes. His face was lined with a quiet wisdom, and his eyes held a deep, patient light, as if he had been waiting for this very moment for a very long time. He offered a slight bow, his voice calm and resonant, carrying the weight of ages. "I am Illyra. You have found the cradle, the last sanctuary of those who foresaw the fall. We are the ones who stepped away from the path of conflict, who chose to preserve rather than to conquer. We have watched from a distance, and we have waited for the one who carries the key." His gaze settled not on Kalin's face, but on the data core he still held in his hand. The core pulsed in response, its light softening to a gentle, steady glow, as if it were finally exhaling after holding its breath for a generation. The revelation settled over them, not with the shock of a weapon, but with the profound weight of a long-lost truth. The architects were not the last of their kind, and their salvation was not a gift. It was a theft. They had not built a new world from the ashes of the old. They had commandeered the embers, stamping out the original flame to fuel their own rigid order. The cradle was not a secret base. It was a library, a living archive of what humanity was meant to be before a splinter faction, calling themselves architects, decided to rewrite its destiny. Illyra gestured for them to follow, leading them away from the ship and toward structures that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. The air itself felt different here, clean and full of a quiet hum of life. So this was the truth the architects had tried to erase, a paradise of knowledge and peace they had abandoned in their quest for absolute control. What other histories were preserved here? And what did it mean that they had been waiting for a scavenger from a broken world to arrive with a key he did not fully understand? Illyra led them into a chamber that felt less like a room and more like a living memory. The air shimmered, and the world dissolved around them into a breathtakingly clear holographic recreation of the old Earth. Kalin watched the familiar cities, not in ruins but thriving under a blue sky. Then the memory shifted. He saw the first silent dropships descend, not with weapons, but with aid, medical supplies, and promises of unity. The architects were welcomed as saviors. The scene fast-forwarded, showing the subtle introduction of a new atmospheric additive, distributed globally under the guise of a health initiative to strengthen humanity against lingering environmental toxins. Illyra's voice was a soft, sorrowful counterpoint to the images. It was not a cure, he explained. It was a key, a biological trigger designed to lay dormant until a specific, synchronized signal was broadcast across the planet. The hologram showed the day of the Great Culling. There were no explosions, no fire from the sky. People simply began to feel unwell, then slowly, peacefully, they lay down to rest and did not wake up. It was a gentle, planet-wide fading, a sterilization of the human spirit disguised as a merciful end. Kalin's breath caught in his throat, his hand instinctively going to the data core at his side. The scale of the deception was so vast, so absolute, it defied comprehension. "They did not save us from the fall," he whispered, the words raw and heavy with the weight of 8 billion souls. "They caused it. They did not build a new world from our ashes. They simply moved into our empty house and called it their own." The hologram faded, leaving them standing in the quiet archive, the ghost of a murdered world hanging between them. This was the truth the core had been built to preserve. Not a record of a tragedy, but evidence of a crime. What kind of justice could ever be possible for a sin of such magnitude? The air in the archive grew cold around Illyra's words. They were not visitors from a distant star. They were our own children, a faction of humanity that had achieved a technological transcendence centuries before the fall. They looked upon their own kind, upon our turbulent emotions and our perceived flaws, and saw not a species to nurture, but a failed experiment. Jax let out a low sound, a raw scrape of a breath. His hand went unconsciously to the lightning-scarred tissue on his neck. "They are not our saviors," he snarled, the words dripping with a venom born of a lifetime of forced labor. "They are our executioners." Illyra nodded slowly, his gaze filled with a profound sorrow. In their eyes, emotion was a design flaw, a chaotic variable that guaranteed self-destruction. Their solution was not to guide us, but to replace us. The New World Order was not a shield against chaos. It was a blueprint for a new, sanitized version of humanity, built in their own cold, logical image. They saw the Great Culling not as a mass loss of life, but as a necessary system reboot, a wiping of the slate so they could install a cleaner, more efficient operating system. The paradise of the Cradle was the path they had rejected, a future where technology and human spirit could coexist. The architects chose control over connection, absolute order over the messy, beautiful potential of a free will they could no longer understand. They did not just conquer our world. They judged us unworthy of it and passed a sentence of extinction disguised as salvation. The core in Kalin's hand felt suddenly different, no longer a simple key or a compass, but something alive with a terrible purpose. Illyra's gaze was solemn as he looked at the softly pulsing object. "This device is not merely a record of events," he explained, his voice resonating in the quiet archive. "It is an empathy bomb. Its purpose is to broadcast a resonant frequency, one keyed directly to the deepest parts of the human psyche. When activated at the heart of their central network, it will not transmit data. It will transmit experience. It will unleash the raw, unfiltered memories and emotions of the billions lost in the Great Culling. The final moments of a mother comforting her child, the quiet despair of a scientist realizing the truth, the collective shock of an entire world fading into silence, every feeling, every stolen breath, will flood their systems all at once." Kalin's fingers tightened around the core. He understood now. The architects built their entire civilization, their unbreakable order, upon a foundation of pure, cold logic. They purged emotion as a flaw, a weakness to be engineered out of existence. This weapon does not use plasma or explosives. It uses the very thing they tried to erase. It forces them to feel the weight of what they have done. It is a flood of soul against a wall of circuit and code. And no logic can withstand the sheer, overwhelming truth of 8 billion hearts breaking at once. Could a memory become the most powerful weapon in the universe, and was anyone, even its bearer, truly ready for the echo of that much sorrow? The Star River was no longer a relic, but a vessel reborn. Within the Cradle's serene docks, its scarred hull was infused with technologies that felt less like machines and more like living systems. New conduits pulsed with a soft, internal light, and the engines hummed with a quiet, potent energy they had never possessed before. The work was swift, a silent communion of purpose between the refugees from a broken world and the guardians of a lost one. As the final systems check glowed green, Illyra approached Kalin alone. He held out a small, perfectly formed crystalline device that seemed to capture and hold the light of this peaceful sanctuary. His voice was low, meant for Kalin alone. This resonator will magnify the core's signal 1,000-fold. Do not activate it until you are at the very heart of their order, where their central consciousness resides. He paused, his ancient eyes holding Kalin's with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. The weapon is truth, but the delivery is everything. The fate of what remains of your humanity does not rest on this technology. It rests entirely on your conviction to see this through. Kalin closed his hand around the crystal. It was warm, almost like a living heartbeat. He understood the terrible symmetry of their mission now. They were not delivering a bomb, but a memory. They were not going to war, but to a funeral one that had been delayed for a generation. To awaken a numb world, they would have to make it feel everything it had been built to forget. Could a heart frozen by logic truly be shattered by a wave of resurrected sorrow? And what would be left in the silence after the storm? The Star River slid through the void like a thought, its new crystalline hull bending sensor waves and light around it, rendering it a ghost against the sprawling obsidian dreadnought of the Citadel. This was the heart of the Order, a perfect geometric fortress humming with silent, terrible power. Inside the cockpit, the tension was a physical presence, thick enough to taste. Lyra's eyes were fixed on a complex schematic of the station, her finger tracing a single, faint line that pulsed with a weak energy signature amidst the overwhelming fortress of data. Her voice cut through the silence, low and certain. "That is our way in. It is a maintenance shaft, but it leads directly to the central processing core. It is a vulnerability they would never anticipate, a vein left exposed from a time before they considered their own systems perfect." Kalin followed her gaze, understanding the gamble. They were not soldiers storming a gate. They were a pathogen seeking a single, unguarded cell, a microscopic flaw in an empire of absolute control. The shaft was a relic of the station's construction, a forgotten artery leading straight to the heart of the machine that had judged a world. Could a memory, carried along such a fragile thread, truly be enough to stop a god? The sterile white corridors of the Citadel were a tomb of perfect silence, every surface gleaming under a cold, sourceless light. There were no guards, no barriers, no hint of the immense power concentrated here. It felt less like a fortress and more like a finished product, a world already completed and sealed. The silence was a trap, and they all knew it, their footsteps echoing like a confession in the vast, empty space. The central core chamber opened before them, a vast, circular room where the air itself seemed to hum with a singular, conscious will. And there, standing before the pulsating heart of the station, a sphere of woven light and data, was the Chancellor. Her serene smile was exactly as it appeared on the broadcasts, but up close, its emptiness was chilling. It did not reach her eyes, which held the calm, flat gaze of a predator that has already won. "I knew the Cradle would send you," she said, her voice a smooth, resonant echo in the chamber. "You have done exactly as predicted. You bring the very tool I need to complete the final assimilation." Her gaze fell to the data core in Kalin's hand. "Your empathy," she stated, the word sounding like a clinical diagnosis for a disease, "will be the catalyst for perfect unity." She gestured to the glowing sphere behind her. "Our order is a symphony of logic, but it lacks one final, binding element to achieve total harmony. The raw, unfiltered emotional resonance contained within that device is the last ingredient. When integrated into our core consciousness, it will not disrupt us. It will complete us. It will allow us to finally understand the subjects we guide, to perfectly anticipate and absorb every flicker of dissent or fear, transforming it into seamless compliance. Your weapon is the key to our ultimate control." The terrible brilliance of her plan unfolded in the sterile air. They had not been on a mission of liberation, but acting as delivery agents for their own final subjugation. The memory of 8 billion souls was not a bomb to shatter the order, but a resource to be consumed, a spice to be added to the recipe of their eternal dominion. How do you fight an enemy that does not see your greatest sorrow as a weakness, but as the one component they are missing? A soft, percussive hum filled the chamber as shimmering energy barriers snapped into existence, sealing every archway and exit with a wall of brilliant, unwavering light. From seamless sections of the white walls, hidden panels retracted, and squads of enforcers materialized in perfect, silent formation, their polished armor reflecting the cold glow of the core. The Chancellor's serene smile did not falter. It was a smile that had been waiting. "Your determination was a variable we accounted for," she said, her voice calm and measured. "We knew the Cradle would not surrender its greatest weapon to mere force. It required a believer. We allowed you to retrieve the core, to follow the path, to feel the thrill of discovery. Your entire journey was a carefully curated path to a single objective: for you to acquire their amplification technology and deliver it directly to us. You have not brought a weapon into our heart. You have delivered the final component required for our synthesis. The new world order is now inevitable." The sterile air grew heavy, the hum of the barriers a constant reminder of the cage they were in. They had not outsmarted the system. They had walked a path laid for them, their deepest hopes and convictions used as the very tools of their own entrapment. Every sacrifice, every narrow escape, had been a line of code in a script they never knew they were performing. The core in Kalin's hand no longer felt like a key or a weapon, but like a component in a machine he was now completing. How do you fight an enemy that does not just predict your moves, but writes the very story you believe you are living? The sterile hum of the barriers was the only sound, a cage of pure energy closing around them. Jax did not look at the advancing enforcers, nor at the Chancellor's triumphant gaze. His eyes met Kalin's for a single, eternal second, and in them was not fear, but a fierce and final clarity. His hand moved to his belt, to a device no one had noticed, a final contingency forged in the fires of the Warrens. The world did not slow down, it simply stopped. Then a flash of pure, concussive white. It was not a loud explosion, but a deep, resonant thump that seemed to come from within the very matter of the room. The brilliant energy barriers flickered, fractured like glass, and dissolved into a shower of harmless sparks. The overload surged through the local grid, plunging the chamber into a chaotic, strobing half-light. In that sudden, shattered silence, a hard shove sent Kalin stumbling forward. Jack's voice was a raw, guttural roar, cutting through the ringing in their ears. "Do it now, for everyone we lost." He did not turn to watch Kalin go. He turned to face the tide of polished armor, a weathered, scarred man standing alone in the flickering dark, his very presence a declaration of war against the clean, logical order of the void. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting for 12 more seconds. The sound that followed was not one of elegant combat, but of sheer, brutal defiance, a hopeless, beautiful noise that carved a path through the silence. In that moment, Kalin understood the true nature of their weapon. It was not the core or the crystal. It was the unbreakable, illogical, human will to say no, a force that no system of control could ever fully anticipate or absorb. He ran toward the pulsating heart of the machine, the memory of a sacrifice now forever part of the story. What song would the machine sing when it was forced to listen to a sound it was built to erase? The console bucked under his hands as Kalin slammed the core and the warm crystal into their ports. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a light that was not a light erupted from the central sphere, a silent, invisible wave that flooded the network. It was not data. It was a ghost storm. It was the first cry of a newborn baby, the warmth of a held hand, the quiet comfort of a shared memory. It was the sharp sting of a goodbye, the crushing weight of a hope lost, the simple, unspoken love between parent and child. It was the collective, brilliant, messy symphony of 8 billion lives, felt all at once. The Chancellor's serene mask shattered. Her hands flew to her temples as she staggered back, a raw, uncomprehending shriek tearing from her throat. "What is this chaos?" she cried out, her voice cracking under a weight it was never designed to bear. "It cannot be processed." The Citadel itself began to tremble, the sterile white walls flickering, momentarily replaced by phantom images of green fields and bustling, sun-drenched cities from a world long gone. The very air grew thick with a resonance it had never known, the hum of pure logic now dissonant against the overwhelming tide of feeling. The enforcers, who had been advancing with machine-like precision, faltered. Their synchronized movements broke as their systems were flooded with sensory overload, with echoes of experiences that had no tactical value, only profound, undeniable truth. Lyra and Finn fought on, not against soldiers, but against a system in the throes of a nervous breakdown, their own actions now amplified by the confusion rippling through their enemies. The weapon was not destroying the machine. It was reminding the machine of the hearts it had been built to forget. Could a system built for perfect order survive being forced to remember what it meant to be human? The Chancellor's scream was not one of anger, but of a system breaking from within. The flawless digital architecture of the Citadel fractured like ice under a sudden, impossible warmth. Across the vast network, control screens flickered and dissolved, no longer displaying status reports or compliance metrics, but the face of a child laughing, the shared silence of an old couple watching a sunset, the determined focus of an artist at work. These were not data points. They were echoes, the resurrected memories of the billions whose final, peaceful moments were now flooding the machine. The enforcer squads, who moments before were instruments of perfect order, froze in place. Their synchronized programming crashed, overwhelmed by a torrent of sensory input that had no tactical solution, only emotional truth. They did not fall, they simply stopped, their armored forms becoming statues in a gallery of reclaimed memory. The Chancellor clutched her head, her body contorted as the walls she had built around her own consciousness crumbled. The cold, logical persona she had cultivated for a generation shattered, and from behind it surged everything she had been engineered to suppress, a tsunami of grief, of love, of regret, of a humanity she had been taught to despise as a weakness. She was not being attacked. She was being remembered, and the weight of that remembrance was an agony her flawless system had no protocol to handle. The very foundations of the New World Order were not exploding, they were feeling, and in that feeling they were forgetting how to be a wall. What becomes of a perfect, logical empire when it is forced to dream? A deep, groaning shudder ran through the floor, a sound of metal screaming in a way that had nothing to do with logic. The phantom echoes of lost lives still hung in the air, but they were now drowned out by a new, more immediate terror. The Citadel was coming apart. Finn's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with panic. "The reactor chain is overloading," he yelled, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward the shuddering corridor. "We have to go now. This entire station is going to be a cloud of dust in 5 minutes." There was no time to look back. No final glance at the Chancellor, who was now curled on the floor, weeping uncontrollably as the ghosts of a world she had erased played out across the failing screens. They ran, their boots slipping on the groaning deck plates. The pristine white corridors were now a maze of flickering red emergency lights and falling debris. Conduits spat showers of sparks from the ceiling, and the air grew thick with the acrid smell of burning insulation. It was not a controlled shutdown. It was a system having a fatal heart attack, its perfect order devolving into pure, chaotic entropy. Their desperate sprint through the dying Leviathan was a race against a collapsing star. Every junction they passed shuddered, every doorway threatened to seal shut forever. The Star River, their only ticket out of this metal coffin, felt a universe away. Could they outrun the final, violent death throes of an empire built to last forever? The Star River shuddered violently as a shockwave of pure force slammed into its newly fortified hull. Kalin fought the controls, his hands a blur, weaving the ship through a suddenly blossoming galaxy of white-hot shrapnel. What was once the unbreachable Citadel was now an expanding cloud of incandescent debris, the dying embers of a fallen god. On the scanner's screen, Lyra watched the silent, terrible beauty of the destruction. The last fragments of the central core winked out of existence, their signals vanishing into the cosmic background hum. She did not cheer, she did not cry. Her voice was a soft, hollow thing in the tense quiet of the cockpit. It is over. The signal is broadcasting everywhere. Their network is gone. The words hung in the air not as a victory cry, but as a statement of fact, heavy with the weight of all that had been lost and all that had been unleashed. The architect network, the invisible web that had governed every aspect of life for a generation, had not just been switched off. It had been filled with a truth so profound it had simply ceased to function, like a mind overwhelmed by a memory it could no longer contain. Out there, across the void, on worlds like Neo-Kiv, the silence would be deafening. The constant, guiding hum of the order would be replaced by a new, unsettling quiet, the first breath of a universe suddenly left to its own devices. What would grow in that silence? Would it be the chaos the architects feared, or the first, fragile notes of a song humanity had forgotten how to sing? The first crack of true blue in the sky was a physical shock. As the Star River descended, the perpetual orange haze over Neo-Kiv was not just thinning, it was dissolving, ripped apart by high-altitude winds no longer controlled by the Citadel's weather grids. They flew low over the city, and the silence from below was more profound than any explosion. It was the silence of a held breath finally released. People were not hiding. They stood in the open, in the grand plazas and on the broken balconies, their faces tilted upward. They were not looking at the ship. They were looking at the sky, their expressions a landscape of confusion, disbelief, and a fragile, dawning wonder that had been outlawed for a generation. One man, his face lined with the hardship of a life under the spires, slowly raised a hand to shield his eyes, not from a glare, but from the sheer, impossible brilliance of the color blue. The air itself tasted different, cleaner, carrying scents of wet stone and something earthy, smells that had been scrubbed from the atmosphere for decades. The enforcer patrols were gone, their synchronized rhythm replaced by the hesitant, murmuring voices of a crowd learning how to speak for itself. The chains of the order were not broken with a clash of steel, but with the quiet, overwhelming sight of a sun they had almost forgotten. What do you do when the walls of your world simply vanish, and the only thing left is the vast, terrifying freedom of an open sky? The air in the Warrens was thick with laughter and the sharp, joyous crackle of cooking fires, a sound that had not echoed in these tunnels for a generation. People embraced, sharing stories and stolen luxuries, their faces illuminated by a genuine, unforced happiness. But Kalin stood apart, leaning against a cool stone archway that led to the surface, his gaze fixed on the distant, celebrating crowd. He did not see a victory. He saw the fragile first moments of a new age, and the immense weight of what came next settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Finn found him there, his own face flushed with triumph, a wide grin splitting his features. "We did it, Kalin, we are free." The words hung between them, full of hope and finality. Kalin turned, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight but holding a deeper, more sober light within. "We broke their order," he replied, his voice low and steady. "Now we have to build our own, and we have to make sure it is better." The simple statement cut through the celebratory noise, carrying the ghost of the Citadel's fall and the memory of 8 billion souls. Freedom was not a destination they had reached, but a foundation they now had to lay, stone by careful stone, upon the ashes of a system that had failed in the most profound way imaginable. What blueprint do you use when the only models you have are either a prison of perfect control or the chaotic world that prison was built to contain? How do you build a society that honors the messy, beautiful chaos of the human heart without letting it consume itself all over again? The celebration continued behind them, a necessary release, but ahead lay the quiet, difficult work of dawn. The air in the old Capitol building was cool and still, thick with the scent of rain on broken stone. Leaders from a dozen survivor enclaves sat in a rough circle beneath the open sky, where a shattered dome once stood. There were weathered chieftains from the northern tribes wrapped in furs, pragmatic engineers from the southern hydroponic gardens, and quiet mystics from the coastal marshes. Each face told a story of survival under the order, and now, each pair of eyes held a wary, newfound hope. Kalin, Lyra, and Finn were offered seats of honor on a broken slab of marble, a gesture that felt heavier than any throne. An elder from the northern tribes, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by wind and hardship, was the first to break the respectful silence. His voice, though raspy, carried the weight of mountains. "We have been given a second chance," he said, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. "We must not squander it by repeating the mistakes of the past." His words were not a celebration, but a warning. They all knew the history, the old world that had torn itself apart before the architects ever arrived. The fear in the room was palpable, a silent question hanging in the air. Would they now simply rebuild the same flawed world that had made them vulnerable to conquest in the first place? A woman from the southern garden stood, her hands stained with soil. "The architects gave us absolute order, and it was a cage," she began. "But our ancestors had absolute freedom, and it led to conflict that consumed everything. We cannot choose one old extreme over the other. We must find a new path, one that walks the line between the two." Lyra leaned forward, her practical mind cutting to the heart of the issue. The old world failed because its systems could not handle the complexity of human need. The architects failed because they tried to remove human need entirely. Our foundation cannot be control, and it cannot be chaos. It has to be communication. We need a way for every voice to be heard, not just the loudest or the most logical. Finn nodded, adding, "The data core showed us that our greatest strength is our collective memory, our shared story. Maybe our new system should be built like that. Not a single central command, but a network of communities, each self-sufficient, but constantly sharing knowledge and support. Like the roots of a forest, interconnected but independent." The elder listened, his stern expression softening into a thoughtful frown. "It is a delicate balance," he conceded. "Too much independence, and we fracture into 1,000 warring tribes. Too much connection, and we build another central spire that can be toppled or corrupted. We are not building a new empire. We are planting a garden, and we must be careful what seeds we sow in this freshly turned soil." The first council had begun not with a declaration of laws, but with a shared acknowledgement of a profound responsibility. How do you design a society that values both the individual and the whole, when the ghosts of two catastrophic failures loom so large in recent memory? The offer came not as a ceremony, but in the quiet of the old library, the very place where their journey had truly begun. The elder from the northern tribes spoke for the council, his voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. They needed a figurehead, a single voice to unite the scattered communities, a leader to guide the first difficult steps. They wanted Kalin. He listened respectfully, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of the broken shelves where he had first found the core. When the elder finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Kalin's gaze was distant, fixed on a point beyond the crumbling walls. "I am grateful for your trust," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I must decline. I am a scavenger, not a politician. My purpose was to break the old world. It is up to others, with cleaner hands and clearer visions, to build the new one." He turned to Lyra, who stood watching him with a knowing look. He had carried the weight of a dead civilization's memory for so long, a burden that had forged him into a tool for demolition. To accept a crown, even one forged from hope, felt like building another prison, this time with himself as the warden. He instead proposed a different structure, a council of equals where no single voice could ever hold absolute power again. Leadership, he argued, should be a rotating duty, a shared burden that prevented any one person from ever becoming another chancellor. It was a radical idea, born from the ashes of two failed systems. Could a society truly govern itself without a head? Or was the desire for a single, strong leader an inescapable part of the human condition? The old communication spire, a needle of dark metal piercing the clearing sky, became Lyra's new workshop. It was a place of ghosts, a monument to the very control she sought to dismantle. While the council debated laws and land rights, she and a team of engineers descended into its humming depths, surrounded by the dormant machinery of the architects. Her task was not to reactivate the old network, a web designed for surveillance and command, but to reweave it entirely. She stood before the council not for permission, but to outline a new vision. "We will use their tools," she stated, her voice echoing with a quiet resolve in the chamber, "but we will not repeat their philosophy. The technology they built to command will be repurposed to connect. It will serve life, not control it." Her plan was audacious. Instead of a single, powerful broadcast hub that could be monopolized, she proposed a decentralized web of smaller, solar-powered relays. These nodes would be simple to build and easy to repair, their designs shared freely between communities. A farmer in the southern gardens could check a weather forecast without asking a central authority. A medic in the northern tribes could request specific supplies and receive answers from 3 different enclaves. Knowledge would flow like water, finding its own level, its own path. It was technology modeled not on a pyramid, but on a neural network, a system where the loss of one node would not silence the whole. Could the very instruments of subjugation be transformed into the threads of a truly free society? The hum of the new relay station was a gentle, hopeful sound, a far cry from the oppressive silence of the old network. Finn had spent weeks in the cool, cavernous space, meticulously weaving the new connections, his fingers dancing across makeshift consoles as he helped Lyra bring her vision to life. It was during a routine calibration, while filtering out the last ghost signals of the dead Citadel, that he first noticed the anomaly. At first, he dismissed it as cosmic background noise, a leftover echo from the architect's collapse. But the signal persisted, a faint, repeating pattern buried deep in the static. His breath hitched as he isolated the frequency, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It was not an echo. It was a voice. He ran through the rain-slicked streets to the old Capitol building, his mind reeling. He burst into the council chamber, his clothes soaked and his face pale. The debate over water rights stopped instantly as all eyes turned to him. "They are not all gone," he stammered, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and dread. "We are not the only ones." He projected the data onto the central stone wall. Scattered across the star charts were other signals, other whispers in the dark. One was a looping, automated distress call from a Martian mining colony, its timestamp indicating it had been transmitting for over a generation, a plea for aid sent into a silent void. Another, even fainter, originated from the Jovian system, a fragmentary data burst from a research outpost orbiting Europa, its message corrupted but its desperate intent unmistakable. These were not architect signals, they were human. Survivors from the fall, isolated and completely cut off, had been calling out for help for decades, their signals blocked by the very network that had just been silenced. The council sat in stunned silence, the map of their known world suddenly expanding into a star-flecked tapestry of lost brothers and sisters. They had believed their struggle was for the future of Earth alone, but the universe had just grown much larger, and with it, their responsibility. How many other voices were still waiting to be heard? And what would it mean for their fragile new beginning to answer that call? The silence that followed the transmission was a heavy, listening thing. Inside the newly repurposed comms hub, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic pulse of the signal repeating into the void, a digital heartbeat sent out into an ocean of stars. They had thrown a single fragile stone into a pond of infinite depth, and now they could only wait for the ripples to find a shore. Days turned into weeks, filled with the hard, grounding work of rebuilding. The Council established its first shared law, a simple, profound declaration that no individual or community could claim ownership of another, a direct refutation of the architect's core philosophy. Farmers exchanged seeds adapted for the newly cleansed soil, and engineers from Neo-Kiv helped the northern tribes reinforce their dwellings against the returning seasons. Life was stitching itself back together, one careful thread at a time. Then, one evening, as Finn monitored the listening arrays, a chime echoed through the hub, so soft it was almost missed. It was not a voice, it was data, a compressed packet of information sent on the same frequency they had used. His hands trembled as he decoded it. The screen resolved not into words, but into a series of complex schematics and chemical formulae, tagged with a single, looping symbol. It was a detailed blueprint for an atmospheric filtration system, one far more efficient than anything they had been able to salvage. Attached was a simple, text-only line. Your signal was received. Your freedom is your greatest asset. Protect it. This data may help. There was no identification, no request, no demand. It was a gift, passed from one unseen hand to another. The message had not been answered by a cry for help, but by an offer of support from someone or something that had been listening all along. Who else was out there in the vast dark? And what other silent partnerships were waiting to be formed? The blueprints from the stars changed everything. They were a key to a door no one knew was locked, a silent confirmation that their small world was not alone. While the Council focused on stabilizing the nascent alliance and Lyra's network hummed with the chatter of a reconnecting planet, Kalin found himself drawn back to the silence of the old starport. He would stand for hours, his gaze tracing the rusted outlines of the Star River, his mind not on the world they had saved, but on the countless voices still lost in the dark. Peace, it turned out, was a cage his spirit could not inhabit. He began gathering a different kind of crew, not politicians or farmers, but pilots, engineers, and those with the same restless fire in their eyes that had once driven him to scavenge in forgotten libraries. Lyra found him one evening, inventorying supplies in a hangar, his movements sharp with a familiar, focused energy. She watched him for a long moment, her arms crossed. "The Council is naming the new settlement tomorrow," she said, her voice soft but carrying a sharp edge of concern. "They are calling it Unity. You should be there." Kalin did not look up from the crate of ration packs he was counting. "They do not need me for that," he replied, his tone even. "They need builders, and I am not one." "We were almost erased from the universe, Lyra, every single one of us." He finally met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the same haunted conviction that had carried him through the fall of the Citadel. That signal from the Jovian outpost, the Martian distress call, they are not just echoes. They are our family, scattered and alone. We have this one fragile chance. We need to find the others to make sure humanity survives together. Not as isolated tribes on different worlds, but as something connected. Something that can never be erased again. He was not rejecting the peace they had won. He was protecting it, by ensuring its seeds were planted far beyond their own atmosphere. His purpose had simply evolved from breaking a prison to rebuilding a family across the stars. Could a scavenger of ruins become the architect of a galactic community? Or was he simply chasing phantoms into an endless, hungry night? The wreckage of the Citadel yielded more than just twisted metal and shattered glass. In a shielded vault that had survived the core's detonation, a recovery team found a single, pristine data slate. It was a personal log, sealed and protected, its contents dating back to a time before the Great Culling, to the woman who would become the Chancellor. Her name was Dr. Aris Thorne. The recording showed a young scientist, her face unlined and her eyes bright with a fervent, desperate hope. She stood in a pristine lab, but the screens behind her displayed a world in chaos. Cities shrouded in smoke from resource conflicts, maps flickering with the hotspots of collapsing nations. Her voice was not the calm, resonant echo of the Chancellor, but a passionate, trembling plea. "We have the capacity for such beauty, for such connection," she said, gesturing to the turmoil on the screens. "Yet we choose this over and over, this endless cycle of fear and violence. We are a species with the mind of a god and the heart of a scared child, and the child is always winning." The log detailed her work on the very atmospheric additive that would later become the key to the culling. Her initial thesis was one of healing, a global sedative to lower aggression and ease societal tensions, a temporary measure to give diplomacy a chance. But as the world outside her lab spiraled further into conflict, her idealism curdled into a grim, absolute certainty. The recording jumped forward in time. She was older now, her face etched with the strain of watching her life's work be twisted. She sat in a darkened room, the weight of a terrible decision pressing down on her. "The temporary measure is not enough," she whispered to the recorder, her voice hollow. "The chaos is too deeply woven into our nature. To save humanity from itself, we must edit the source code. We must remove the variables of rage, of greed, of this chaotic, beautiful, and ultimately self-destructive empathy. Peace is not a state we can achieve. It is a state we must be engineered to accept." The log ended there, with a young idealist's dream of saving the world hardening into a tyrant's conviction that the world needed to be remade. She did not see herself as a monster, but as a surgeon performing a radical, necessary operation on a patient determined to self-destruct. This glimpse into her past did not forgive the 8 billion lives lost, but it cast their loss in a new, tragic light. The New World Order was not born from a desire for power, but from a broken heart's conclusion that humanity was a flaw in need of a fix. What does it mean when our greatest protectors become our most profound jailers, convinced that the cage itself is the only form of safety possible? The rain fell on Neo-Kiev as a soft, cleansing mist, washing the dust of a long winter from the new stone in the central plaza. It was not a grand obelisk or a triumphant statue, but a low, circular wall of reclaimed granite, its inner face inscribed with a single, repeating pattern, the gentle, endless spiral of a galaxy. There were no names, for there were too many to ever carve. Instead, the monument stood as a quiet space for reflection, a physical acknowledgement of the void left by the Great Culling and the long years of silence that followed. On the first anniversary of the Citadel's fall, the city gathered around it, their faces solemn in the gray light. Kalin moved through the crowd, his own journey from scavenger to symbol feeling both distant and unbearably close. He stepped inside the circle and placed his hand upon the cold, wet stone, feeling the weight of every life it represented. He looked out at the sea of faces, at Lyra and Finn, at the council elders and the children who had never known the orange sky. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and carried on the damp air. "We remember," he said, "not to honor a victory, but to accept a burden. We remember the cost of a peace bought with lies and the price of a freedom taken by force. We remember so we never have to build a world on forgetting again." The words were not a celebration. They were a vow etched into the heart of their new beginning, a promise to the future that the foundation of their society would be the unvarnished truth of its past, no matter how painful that truth might be. The first light of dawn caught the crystalline wing of the Starship, setting it ablaze against the fading stars. It was a vessel born of two worlds, its hull forged from Earth's resilient alloys and its heart powered by the Cradle's serene energy systems. Its design was a promise kept, a bridge between a scarred past and a hopeful future, and its name was etched in clean, bold letters on the side, a tribute to a sacrifice that had bought them this very moment, the Jacks. On the observation platform, high above the bustling new spaceport, Lyra watched the final preparations. Her network had helped coordinate the global effort, sharing schematics and resources across continents to make this day possible. The ship's mission was clear, a solemn promise etched into its flight plan, to seek out the lost whispers from Mars and Jupiter, to answer the calls that had gone unheard for a generation. A soft countdown echoed across the field, and then a profound silence fell as the ship lifted, not with a roar of fire, but with a gentle, rising hum. It ascended smoothly, a sliver of silver climbing into the clear blue sky, a sight that would have been impossible just 1 year before. Lyra did not cheer with the crowd below. She simply watched, her hands resting on the cool railing as the ship became a star, then a pinprick, then a memory against the vastness. Her whisper was carried away by the wind, a quiet testament to a threshold crossed. This is the true beginning. The launch was not an end, but an opening of a new chapter in the human story, one where their destiny was no longer tied to a single world, but to the boundless potential of the cosmos itself. What new voices would they find waiting in the dark, and what stories would they bring back to the garden they were still learning to tend? The faint transmission arrived not with a fanfare, but as a whisper woven into the background static of Lyra's new network, a signal so clean and precise it could only have come from one source. Illyra's voice was calm as ever, yet it carried the weight of stars. The seed has been planted. Nurture it well. The galaxy watches with hope. The message was brief, but its implications were infinite. It was not a command or a warning, but a quiet acknowledgement, a passing of the torch. Humanity's struggle was not an isolated event. Their rebirth was a single, tender shoot in a vast, cosmic garden, and other gardeners were watching its progress. This changed the very nature of their freedom. They were not just building for themselves anymore, but as part of a larger community they could not yet see, a tapestry of life where every thread mattered. The responsibility felt both awesome and humbling. How do you nurture a fragile new world when you know the eyes of unknown civilizations are upon you, not with judgment, but with a shared, silent hope for your success? The message reframed their entire existence, transforming their isolation into a sacred, shared trust. The silence of deep space is a different kind of quiet, one broken only by the gentle hum of the long-range sensor array. Finn was running a routine diagnostic when the alert chimed, a single, soft tone that should have signaled a passing comet or a piece of ancient debris. But the signature on his screen was neither. It was a vessel, its design utterly alien, a geometry of sharp angles and impossible curves that seemed to drink the light from the stars around it. It moved with a chilling, silent purpose, on a direct course for the inner system, and it ignored every standard hail and friendly greeting they sent its way. He watched it for a full minute, his blood running cold before he turned and ran. He did not wait for protocol. He burst into the council chamber, his face ashen, the data pad trembling in his hand. He projected the sensor feed onto the central wall, the silent, predatory shape hanging in the void for all to see. "We have visitors," he said, his voice strained and quiet. "And we do not know if they are friendly." The celebratory air of the last year evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. They had just finished burying one god, and now another, completely unknown, was knocking at their door. Was this the consequence of their newfound freedom? An invitation to a wider universe they were not yet prepared to join? The alien ship hung on the main display, a silent question mark against the star field. In the council chamber, the air grew thick with a fear they all recognized, a ghost from their recent past. Voices rose in a panicked chorus, arguing for stealth, for hiding their energy signatures and retreating into the ruins, just as their ancestors had done before the architects came. "We cannot risk another conquest," one elder pleaded, his hands shaking. "Our freedom is too new, too fragile. We must protect what we have built." Kalin listened to the fear, watched it ripple through the room, and he remembered the weight of the data core in his hand, the crushing silence of a controlled existence. He stood, and the room slowly quieted, all eyes turning to the scavenger who had broken an empire. His voice was not loud, but it was firm, cutting through the anxiety like a blade. "We spent a generation under a boot because we feared what was different." He let the words hang there, let them recall the orange sky and the silent enforcers. "We hid from the unknown, and in our fear we allowed a cage to be built around us. We will not make that mistake again." He looked at each face in the circle, his gaze unwavering. "Hiding is just another form of the same prison. It assumes we are weak, that we have no right to speak for ourselves in a wider universe. We will greet them, not as masters or slaves, but as equals. Whatever is out there, we face it on our own terms this time. The choice is not between safety and danger. It is between courage and the slow death of fear." His words did not erase the fear, but they gave it a new shape, transforming it from a reason to hide into a reason to stand tall. What would it mean for a species so recently freed to take its first step onto the galactic stage not with a weapon in hand, but with an open one? The diplomatic shuttle was a fragile silver leaf against the star-dusted black, its hull unarmed and polished to a mirror finish. Inside, Kalin watched the alien vessel grow in the main viewport, its impossible angles seeming to fold space around it. The silence between them was a living thing, filled with the hum of life support and the weight of centuries. Lyra's voice was soft, barely a whisper in the quiet cabin. "Are we ready for this?" Her hands rested on the comms panel, a finger hovering over the switch that would open a channel to the unknown. Kalin did not look away from the mesmerizing, beautiful ship. He thought of the orange sky, the silent enforcers, and the crushing order they had shattered. He thought of the monument in the rain, and the promise they had made to never build another cage, even one made of fear. "We have to be," he replied, his own voice steady. "This is the new world we chose, one built not on hiding from what we do not understand, but on meeting it with open eyes." The alien ship made no aggressive moves, no demands. It simply waited, a silent, elegant sphinx at the edge of their solar system, holding a question in its perfect, geometric form. What answer would they give, and what new story would begin with the first word they spoke into the void? The alien ship did not send words, but a cascade of pure light. The data packet washed over their systems, bypassing language entirely to imprint a shared vision directly into their minds. Kalin felt a vertigo of stars, a sensation of soaring through a nebula of impossible colors, and then a profound stillness. He stood in a place that was not a place, a city woven from crystalline light and living wood, where beings of 1,000 forms moved in harmonious silence. A creature of flowing water and shimmering fronds communicated with a being of solid rock and glowing internal fire, through a simple exchange of warmth and shifting light patterns. There was no central spire of command, no single governing voice. Instead, a gentle, interconnected awareness hummed between them all, a network of mutual support and respect for individual difference. It was a symphony of life, a testament to what a society could become when it chose cooperation over conquest, when diversity was seen not as a threat, but as the foundation of its strength. The vision faded, leaving behind a single, resonant feeling in the air, a clear and unmistakable question posed not with words, but with feeling. It was an invitation to join this vast, silent alliance, to add humanity's unique song to the cosmic chorus. What does a species, so recently fractured and reborn, have to offer a community that has already achieved such peace? And are they ready to step onto a stage where their entire violent history is just one story among countless others? The return of the diplomatic ship was not marked by a military escort, but by a global, shared silence. As Kalin stepped onto the platform in what was once Neo-Kiv, he was met not by the faces of a council, but by the upturned faces of a planet, his image projected onto makeshift screens in every plaza and newly tilled field. He held no weapon, no data core, only a simple microphone. His voice, when it came, was clear and carried the quiet weight of the void he had just traversed. The fall taught us the cost of isolation and tyranny, he began, the words resonating across continents. We built walls out of fear, and those walls became our tomb. But the stars have given us a chance to learn the value of connection. He paused, letting the memory of the orange sky and the silent enforcers hang in the air for a final moment. The invitation we have received is not a command. It is an offering, a chance to share our story and to learn from the stories of a million other worlds. Our new order begins today, not on Earth, but among the cosmos. The message was not one of conquest or dominance, but of humble participation. Humanity was being offered a seat at a table it did not build, in a conversation that had been ongoing for millennia. This was not about becoming masters of the galaxy, but about becoming students of it, contributing their unique song of resilience and hard-won freedom to a chorus that valued every voice. What new kind of civilization would they become, now that their horizon was no longer a line in the sky, but the endless, welcoming dark? The orbital platform was a sliver of polished stone and crystals suspended in the silent dark. Below, the Earth turned, a mosaic of pinprick lights where cities were slowly stitching themselves back together, their glow a soft, defiant answer to the deep velvet of space. Above, the Milky Way unfurled in a river of diamond dust, its immensity both humbling and full of promise. Kalin stood at the railing, the quiet hum of the station the only sound, and for the first time in his life, the silence felt like peace, not a void. Lyra moved to stand beside him, her shoulder gently touching his. She did not look at the stars or the planet, but at his profile, at the lines of hardship that seemed, finally, to be softening in the serene light. She took his hand, her fingers lacing with his, a simple gesture that held the weight of every library they had scavenged and every battle they had fled. Her voice was a soft whisper against the grandeur. We fell so far, but we climbed back, and now we reach even higher. Kalin turned his head, and the smile that touched his lips was not the grimace of a survivor or the determined mask of a revolutionary. It was an unguarded, genuine expression of hope, quiet and profound, born from the certainty that their climb was not over, but was only just beginning. Their small, bright world, once a prison and then a refuge, was now a vessel, its sails catching the solar winds as it took its first, tentative steps into a universe of infinite possibilities.